All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again for another episode of Dominate the Nation. My name is Maxine Doogan. I'm a currently working prostitute of 30 plus years, and I pretty much plan on working as a prostitute for another 30 plus more. I'm joined with my special guest today, Stephen Lemons. He is a professional journalist, and he writes for the Front Page Confidential, which has documented the Backpage debacle. So thank you, Stephen, for joining me today. I'm so glad to have you.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Maxine.
So I was really looking forward to getting you on the record and hearing what's going on with the case since everybody, Michael Lacey and everybody, was sentenced recently earlier this week. So I'm sure it's a very sad time for our community. We never thought like this day would come. We have been, actively protesting against the closing down of online spaces and free speech for a long time.
Yeah.
So how's everybody doing over there?
Well, it's not a happy time, that's for sure. Lacey was convicted last year of one count of international concealment money laundering. The jury was hung on 84 counts. The judge earlier this year acquitted him on 50 of those hung counts, leaving 34 outstanding. And as you pointed out on Wednesday of last week, she sentenced Lacey to 5 years in prison and hit him with a $3 million fine. There were two former executives of Backpage who fared even worse. They both got 10 years each. The judge denied requests for probation. She did allow them to turn themselves in. She didn't take them into custody that day. They are confined to their homes, and they have ankle monitors to make sure they stay there. And they will present themselves to the marshals on September 11th. So the appeals process will begin almost immediately. I don't know if they filed a notice of appeal yet, but it will be filed pretty soon, I'm sure. And then go forward from there. Lacey is in the best spirits you could possibly imagine. I mean, given the circumstances, but it looks pretty grim right now. So.
Yeah, because he's like 75 years old.
Right, 76. Yeah, he's in good shape for his age. He has the normal health problems of someone that age, but aside from that, I know people who are in their 70s that look a lot worse, but still, to be 76 and to be sentenced to 5 years, he might be able to do those 5 years, but it's possible it could be a life sentence for him. I mean, he could die in prison.
Yeah, it could be a death sentence for him. Yeah.
Right.
So he was convicted. He wasn't convicted for sex trafficking.
No, they weren't charged with sex trafficking. They were charged with three main things: money laundering, conspiracy, and violations of the U.S. Travel Act, which is a complicated, it's a little bit like the Mann Act, but it's more complicated. And specifically, it says that you have facilitated a business enterprise through interstate commerce, in this case it'd be the internet, that violates state prostitution laws. I mean, there are some other state laws that it can apply to too, but in this case, it's facilitating a business enterprise that operates on the internet and breaks state prostitution laws. So it's very complicated. But in any case, just to finish, I mean, Lacey himself was not convicted on the Travel Act counts at all. So he had nothing to do. It was nothing to do with prostitution per se, even though the judge held him responsible for that as a co-owner of the site. So, but his money laundering conviction had to do with moving some money overseas, mainly because the federal. This happened in 2017. It was after this 2016 arrests they had by Kamala Harris, and in 2017 the federal government was going around to all these banks. The FBI was going to these banks that he did business with and said, "Well, we don't think you should do business with him." And it's something I'm sure that people in this community are aware of. That banks call it reputational risk, and they can deny service to anybody they want. So he really couldn't get a bank in the United States. So his attorney told him, "Well, you can move the money overseas," and he did. That's perfectly legal to do that. You just have to notify the IRS, and you have to pay your taxes, and that's what he did. But nevertheless, even though the government created the situation where he had to do this, and then they charge him with money laundering. So you see how the government works. So anyway,
yeah, they set people up to fail.
Yeah, exactly. It box you into a corner. It's like it's very dispiriting. It is the state of our government, basically. It's sex workers know this very well, obviously. So it's no surprise coming to you. I think it's a surprise to ordinary people who are unfamiliar with how the system works.
Yeah, at the recent Democrat convention in Chicago, they had a woman who she said she called herself a sex trafficking victim, and she said that Kamala had been the one to stop to criminalize Backpage, make Backpage criminal, and it didn't get a lot of applause.
Yeah, not many people paid attention to it. You caught it first. You were the one who told me, because I hadn't seen that. And then I checked it out, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then they put her on, even though they put her on the last day, wasn't it like at 5 o'clock or something? So there weren't a lot of people watching. You were watching, but not a lot of people. But interestingly, someone wrote an op-ed for the OC Register, a guy named Will Swain, who used to be my editor at the OC Weekly because he founded the OC Weekly, and he's the head of a libertarian think tank in California now, and he wrote a really good piece, blistering piece about Kamala and how they're trying to market her as this tough on crime prosecutor, et cetera. But the reality is that like a lot of political prosecutors, she's done a lot of bad stuff, basically, as we know. Not just to sex workers, but just to ordinary, just like to run-of-the-mill citizens. Poor people. It's like, so it's horrible stuff, really. But yeah, it doesn't bode well for sex workers or anyone else, really. You hear this line.
The public.
Yeah, the public in general, really.
So I want to play the video that we did in 2016 when Kamala first charged the Backpage owners. And she charged them at the state level. She was a state prosecutor then. And of course, those charges were dismissed because there was no basis. But, we were out there in 2016. So I wanted to, and, this is, of course, our star child. So let's play this.
My body!
Keep your laws off our bodies!
Stop shutting down sex worker websites!
Stop shutting down sex worker websites! Shame on Kamala Harris!
Make my job less safe!
Stop the war on whores!
Stop the war on whores!
Shame on Kamala Harris and shame on the Texas Attorney General for bringing this ludicrous case against the CEO of Backpage. This attack on Backpage.com by the Attorney Generals of California and Texas is not just an assault on sex work, it's an assault on internet freedom. if people can be criminalized simply for having a website on which other people are alleged to have posted comments that somehow contributed to the commission of some crime, then there is no more free speech on the internet.
So there you go. There's
That
no
was,
more free speech on the internet.
That was prophetic, wasn't it? You know, that's well, as you know, as advocates such as yourself have always pointed out, that it's the canary in the coal mine, right? You know, it's like a subject that neither party is going to champion, or, you know, even on the basis of free speech. It's just, so the only people who've been in, you know, the defendants' corners with this thing has been libertarians and sex workers. I mean, they're the ones who get it, you know. Average, you know, most people don't get it, except, I would say, you know, after we haven't mentioned the fact that one of Lacey's co-defendant, Michael Lacey's co-defendants, Jim Larkin, committed suicide before the most recent trial, and he's the fellow who's on the right of that picture. Lacey is on the left in the glasses, and they together ran Village Voice Media. It was a chain of 17 alternative news weeklies. And, you know, they, since the 1970, they fought the man. You know, they did a lot of investigative journalism. They pissed off a lot of politicians and powerful people, prosecutors, chiefs of police, sheriffs. They've been arrested more than once for their journalism. And they took a principled stand here, I believe, because, you know, it was, you know, it was a fine, granted, it was a fine line, but it was one defined by the First Amendment. And that is that, you know, what the First Amendment doesn't cover is an explicit offer of money for sex, right? Okay, that's not covered by the First Amendment. But the First Amendment does cover pretty much everything else, right? So it's like, even, you know, so if you have a situation where you have like a description like, oh, for a good time call, right? I mean, that can mean a lot of different things, right? It's like, that's can mean almost anything or nothing, you know. It's like nothing may happen, you know. It's like, so it's really perverse and Kafkaesque that these men were being held responsible for acts that may not have occurred or occurred without their knowledge. I mean, you know, that's what's nuts about it. It was interesting too, because as you know, there were two trials. The first trial in 2021 was, and we'll get to, Kamala Harris was prior to the federal case, obviously, but the federal case began in 2018. And there was the first trial was in 2021. It was declared a mistrial after 3 days because the prosecution kept crying sex trafficking, even though they weren't charged with anything to do with sex trafficking. So the judge had to, you know, declare a mistrial. And it was really interesting because one of Kamala Harris's investigators, you know, an investigator with the California Attorney General's office, was one of the first witnesses to testify. And he had investigated on behalf of Kamala Harris Backpage back in 2016. And of course, they brought charges against Lacey and Larkin at that time for pimping, basically. You know, it's like, once again, a completely absurd charge, but and Kamala Harris.
The pimping law, as it's written in the state of California, says that anybody who receives money from a prostitute is a pimp.
Yeah.
So that's anybody. So those are my adult children that I helped through college. You know, that's the veterinarian, you know, the dry cleaner, the landlord, anybody who receives money from a prostitute, from prostitution, is a pimp as defined in state law. So, you know, there's just a lot of problems with those laws and with the prostitution laws. Like, I'm wondering, if prostitution wasn't even illegal, would the travel act that they were charged with, would that have even have stood?
Well, yeah, that's because it's, there's no federal law per se against that criminalizes prostitution. Now there is, since that 2018, of course, in 2018 they passed FOSTA, and there is a provision in there which says that you can't facilitate prostitution via like the internet or something like that. But for prostitution per se, there's no federal crime against it. But so what the Travel Act does is it uses the state laws. So in the case of in the federal case against Backpage, there were specifically 50 ads that they pulled out of the millions of ads that ran on Backpage at one time. And they charged those 50 ads. And so they were saying, well, this is in violation of the state law of, say, Massachusetts or Texas or California. And that's how
they just pulled the ads. They didn't go and arrest those people who are running those ads for prostitution. They didn't have any prostitution proof that those ads were for prostitution.
Well, after the fact, yes, they did, because in some cases there were actual cases connected to some of those cases. Now, some of the cases were not people who were arrested. There was a woman who was advertising herself. There was no exploitation that we know of in this case, and she had several ads that they charged. So she wasn't charged with anything, nor was she a witness. However, there were instances of, they did pick some ads that involved trafficking, and they had trafficking victims that came and testified. I mean, I certainly, and I should hasten to point out that, and I should have said this from the beginning, that anything I say is not reflective of the defendants. I don't speak for them. I speak only for myself. So I don't.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. But you've sat through all the trials. You've been our eyes and ears inside, the nuts and bolts of these two crazy trials that have gone on for the last 6 years.
Yeah, well, I want to get back to what I was talking about with Kamala Harris, because this is the thing she did, huh?
It's so relevant right now.
Yes, it is very relevant. Well, it's so funny. You get on Twitter. You're on Twitter, and people think, if you criticize Kamala Harris, it's like, oh, you're pro-Trump. No, not at all. It's like I have a clear vision in my head of what these people are. They're politicians, and especially elected prosecutors are particularly bad because they abuse their power and use it in a political way. So anyway, she was running for Senate in 2016, and she, in October of 2016, like a month before she's going to get before the election, she arrests Lacey and Larkin, makes a big to-do about them and Backpage, and she was going to hold them accountable, blah, blah, blah. And
she furthered her career. She furthers her political career.
Well, this is the thing
on their backs.
Yes, exactly. And this is what's so disturbing, and everybody should be disturbed by this, even if some people are against prostitution, whatever. They should look at what happened. And what happened was, she did not have the jurisdiction to bring those state charges against Lacey and Larkin, because there was something called Section 230, and Section 230 said, well, we're going to hold interactive website owners harmless when it comes to state criminal laws and civil laws, lawsuits, etc. So, she knew this, because she was one of several attorneys general who sent a letter to Congress saying, we want to go after Backpage, but we can't because of Section 230. She sent this like years before she brought charges against them. So she's running for Senate, and she brings charges against them, makes a big deal out of it. Of course, there are cameras in the courtroom. Their initial appearance is in orange jumpsuits in a cage, that's set in the courtroom, which I didn't know that California did that, by the way. I was like shocked. It looked like something out of Russia or something, It's like, but anyway, so she got the splash, right? She got the perp walk. And almost immediately, well, actually after the election, the judge threw out all the charges, okay? Because he said, look, one, you got Section 230. You may not like it, but it's there. And also, there's this thing called the First Amendment. So you can't do this. And guess what she did? Before she leaves office, the last couple of days of her administration, I don't know if it was right before Christmas or right after, she refiles all the charges. Okay, now this is an abuse of your prosecutorial discretion. And when you bring charges against someone, knowing that you do not have the jurisdiction to do so, that is something that prosecutors get disbarred for. Okay,
She should have been disbarred.
She should have been a bar complaint against her and should have been disbarred. But I'm sure that, like, at that point, she's a senator. I'm sure no one wants to piss off a senator. And it was interesting. Not long after she refiles in 2017, in January 2017, the Senate has a committee hearing where they've subpoenaed Lacey Larkin and a few other Backpage principals to testify before them. Now, there are still charges pending against Lacey and Larkin in California, so they can't speak. They have to take the First Amendment. I mean, they have to take the Fifth Amendment and not speak. They have to sit there as these senators lambast them in public.
Oh, they're punching bags. They're punching bags. Yeah.
And guess who was there? Kamala Harris, who got to point her finger at
further
them.
Her career, further her career some more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Everything she's done is done. So it's not just, the thing is, it's not just a harp on this particular subject, because this is not a one-off.
Oh, okay? Harp, brother. Oh, harp.
Listen, as you know, it's not a one. There are several instances with her, criminalizing truancy and so forth. It's just not good stuff. It's like a this tough on crime stuff that Republicans do all the time. It's no different. Absolutely no different.
Yeah, I mean, she was a co-sponsor of FOSTA, the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, that criminalized prostitution online, and Trump signed it into law.
Yeah,
so
she voted for
they're
it.
no different. Yeah, they're no different in my mind. They're the same. They're the same, people. I mean, that's what politics breeds in this country, are politicians who will, further their careers on your dead body, as they did in this case, and they don't care.
Well, and you know all this too well, of course, but in 2021, the General Accounting Office, the government, did a study on what the result of was taking out Backpage and FOSTA. And guess what they learned? And guess what? The FBI can't do trafficking cases anymore. They can't investigate them. Why? Because Backpage was answering subpoenas within 24 hours and cooperating with law enforcement to find endangered women and children. So now the FBI can't do that because the ads have moved overseas, okay, to jurisdictions that don't give a flip about the U.S. government. Estonia, places like that. It's like they're not going to answer a subpoena. They're not going to cooperate with law enforcement. So guess what? You made the problem worse. This is what politicians did.
Well, they created the problem. They created the problem by continuing to criminalize prostitution, which is what Kamala did here in San Francisco back in 2008. I should play that clip, but she made sure that prostitution continued to be criminalized. So they continue all this criminalization, and then they run around to the banks and say, oh, don't give these people a bank account. They run some discrimination, and then it forces people to have to go overseas to operate. And now they're crying because they don't have any cooperation. But there was cooperation with Backpage. Backpage did cooperate with them even then.
Well, unfortunately, all the cooperation didn't do them any good, because in the end, it was all used against them. It was used against them.
That one more time. Cooperation didn't do them any good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think there was a panel discussion recently, and there was a First Amendment attorney, and he said, it's like appeasing terrorists, basically. That's what you're doing. It's like I think they thought they were doing the right thing at the time, and they certainly thought they were protected by the First Amendment and by Section 230. To go back to the first trial, I was talking about an investigator for the AG's office who testified. It was the first witness who testified at the trial, actually. And it was really interesting. because under the direct questioning by the prosecution, he said, well, this is all obviously prostitution. All these ads are obviously prostitution, blah, blah, blah. You know, and so that he get on the cross-examination, he sang an entirely different tune. The guy said, well, you know, asked him, can you make an arrest based on the vague language and the titillating photos, you know, in these ads? And he said, no, I can't make an arrest. Why not? Well, I wouldn't have probable cause. Well, why not? Well, because the ad themselves don't make an explicit offer of sex for money. Okay. Do you know of anyone who's ever made an arrest based on just the ad? No, I don't know of anyone who's ever made the arrest. So basically what you're saying is that the ad itself is facially legal. And he said, yeah, it's facially legal. So I mean, this is a cop. Now, since then, in the second trial, they had several cops testify. One cop on behalf of the defendants, and most of them on behalf of the prosecution. All of them said, we can't make an arrest based on this ad because there's no sex for money, you know, offer. There has to be the offer, right? And usually, even if there is the offer, even if, say, you know, because Backpage tried to keep any, you know, they didn't want explicit language like that or an offer of sex for money. They kept that off the site, but something might slip through. Moderation is possible. So, but even if that did happen, the cop is not going to go and make an arrest just on that ad because it's going to be too difficult to prosecute, right? They're going to want to set up a bust. They're going to want to have video if they can, or audio. They want all this stuff so they can prosecute someone. So the ad is not enough. So if it's not enough for it's not enough for a cop, how can it be enough for someone who's moderating a website? I mean, that's insane. That's like just
well. And how does it get brought into a federal trial? How do you even bring that bullshit testimony into a federal trial? I don't understand. The prostitution law, as it's written in California, says that there has to be some compensation, you know, money, whatever. There has to be a sex act. So, but the third element is there has to be an act of furtherance. So you have to have those three elements together. Saying I'm going to provide sex service X, Y, and Z for this type of compensation is legal speech. That's legal speech. What makes it illegal, what triggers it into being illegal in terms of how the law is written in California, is that act of furtherance. So the act of furtherance could be, I called the number, or I text the number, or I saw the ad on the internet, or, you know, I found somebody's reviews. All that stuff can be the act of furtherance. But you have to have the person you're targeting to engage in the actual act of furtherance, which means you're going to have contact with that person.
Well,
they're
that's
going to have to, they're going to have to,
because, as you know,
open the door. They're going to have to say hello. They're going to have to, you know, produce the condom. Well, condoms can no longer be used as evidence in prostitution cases in California because we have the getting to zero HIV transmission policy here, right? So we want to incentivize people to carry condoms, not, you know, create situations where those condoms are going to be used as evidence in prostitution cases. So, you know, that's what the act of furtherance. It's very vague language. It's a very badly written law. It's terrible. And all the anti-prostitution people have known this for decades. That's why they went and created the sex trafficking rhetoric and laws that recriminalized all those activities and our relationships, like with the internet, you know, the Backpage owners. They created, you know, through criminalization laws, through that FOSTA SESTA, they criminalized those relationships. You know, so they can put everybody in jail. That's their goal.
Yeah, and it's interesting about the California law. I didn't know about the furtherance. In some states, it's the offer alone. I mean, it depends on the state. As you know, each state has its own specific prostitution laws, which makes it even more difficult for a case like this. You know, but you know, of course, everything they did was lawyered up the butt. I mean, pardon my language. I mean, they had white shoe First Amendment law firms being paid millions of dollars to do audits of Backpage. And of course, every time they come back and say, yeah, this is legal. This is legal. I remember talking to one attorney who advised them. And I said, well, what did you tell them at the time? And he said, well, we didn't look at it as a legal problem. We looked at it as a PR problem. Because as far as they were concerned, this is legal speech. And it was legal speech for a long time. I mean, I personally think it still is, and hopefully the appeals court will agree with us. But, you know, these ads were commonplace. They were in the backs of alternative papers. They were also in mainstream classified ads in newspapers. They were in the yellow pages.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, it was not controversial at all. You know, it's all of a sudden, here's the internet. Oh, it's like some huge you know, that's, as you know.
But my point I want to make here, they've always been controversial because I've been around a long time. And, you know, I tried to reach out to the Backpage owners to warn them, like I, you know, talked to Craig Newmark of Craigslist, you know, for the erotic section. You know, when they started to come after him, I'm like, look, this is attacking our advertising has been a long time tactic. I remember working back in Seattle in the early 1990s. And the police had gone in and arrested. Back then in Seattle, we had a big track, of course, where the Green River Killer was targeting victims, and then we had outcall services. You know, where people would go to hotels or people's homes, and so escorts. So, you know, if you had a car, you could work for the escort service. If you didn't, you had to go to the streets, right? Yeah. So people that worked in the escort services would buy ads, these big ads in the yellow pages, in the U.S. West AT&T yellow pages. You know, it was before AT&T was broken up as a monopoly, you know, by federal courts. So we had these huge ads, and they cost so much money. I mean, those ads were thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a month, you know, to get those ads. And the police went and did a bunch of prostitution arrests in Seattle. They arrested like, you know, I don't know, like 200 people. And they turned around to AT&T and they said, you know what? These ads are advertisement for prostitution. And we've got all these prostitution arrests and convictions, and we're going to use them to prosecute you for promoting prostitution. So the U.S. West yellow pages all of a sudden did not offer any ability to buy ads in their yellow pages, because the yellow pages had pages and pages and pages of escort services. You know, they were making huge money, you know, off those ads.
Right.
And yes, it was huge money. You know, we had ads in the newspaper, the daily newspapers, right? We could buy ads in the daily newspapers. We were a part of that economy for those newspapers, right? That kept those newspapers going. Now look at the newspapers today, right? They're closing down. They can't stay open. Well, you know, if you'd kept the prostitution, you know, the escort ads in there or the massage ads in there, you know, you might have fared a little bit better, I think. But, you know, my point was,
that's a very, I'm glad you explained that, because that is, I think you've told me this before, but, you know, I guess what I'm thinking about is like in the early 2000s, these ads are all over the place. And I don't remember anyone going after Lacey and Larkin at that time, because they owned 17 papers and all this stuff was in the back of the book. So, you know, I guess but that goes back to something interesting. And I guess in some ways, prostitution, sex work has always been the canary in the coal mine, perhaps, you know, in that regard.
Always. Yeah. And so, you know, I tried. And so what happened in the U.S. West yellow page situation is cell phones had just become a thing. So we all just bought cell phones, and we bought licenses for escorts, because that was one of the other ways they would try to keep us from advertising in newspapers, or, you know, for massage or for escorts. They would say, well, you don't have a license to be an escort. So then you'd see everybody run down and get a massage license or an escort license or whatever type of license, that advertising venue would, require. But that just ended up being like easier for cops to go to the registry to find people to target them for arrest for prostitution, and prostitution stings, So people stopped, buying those, ridiculous licenses because they didn't do anything, besides wave the red flag in front of the bull. Here I am, come get me,
Yeah.
I'm trying to be legal, I'm trying to follow the law, but I don't, the law's so arbitrary anyway, and it's arbitrarily enforced. It's arbitrarily worded. And that really comes out loud and clear in this trial about the law being arbitrary and arbitrarily enforced and bent so that, people like the judge who have a big heart on to be able to further her political career, can put this notch in her belt, around hanging these fake charges and convictions around these guys.
Yeah, I mean, the history lesson you give me is important. I appreciate it. And just I don't, I will ask you. I mean, so do you see the current era that we're in as being no different from those in the past? Have we just gone through these stages
Absolutely.
where we'll have? Go ahead. You tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same. It's same. It's just now that we have the internet. So, now what the internet has done, well, for the whole world, is it's made a lot of activities visible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So people can see it better. But really what it's done is it's created, more political fodder for these, unscrupulous, psychopathic politicians who want to further their careers on the backs of anybody they want, thinking that they can get away with it, and they are getting away with it.
Yeah, it's instructive how few people stand up and be counted for freedom of speech. I mean, when FOSTA passed, there were only 2 senators who voted against it, so, and those were outliers, right? The independent thinking people, they're rarities, really rarities. And then no one wants to risk what they think is a risk. And basically just, I don't, even though it's funny because out of the backlash to, the takedown of Backpage and FOSTA, there was a tremendous amount of activism on the part of, yourself and other people like you. And you became more visible and more vocal. I mean, maybe you were always vocal, but, but you got more attention, I think, maybe because of the controversy over it. So, and if there's any, I don't say it was silver lining, but, I don't know. I remember an activist telling me, it was a Latino rights guy, and we were talking about some law that had just been passed to go after them. And I said, well, why aren't people more up in arms in this? And he said, well, people don't respond to the threat. They respond to the repression. And I thought that was really interesting. I think he's right. It's like when you feel the repression, that's when people come out. That's when people stand up, So you guys have been the bravest, really, in standing up for your rights and for everybody's rights. That's the thing people don't understand. It's like, look at what happened with Craigslist and after FOSTA, or actually before FOSTA was even passed, they shut down their personals. I mean, so we can't have that anymore. We can't have that freedom of speech because it might be used, in some way by, for prostitution or sex work or whatever. And then also the thing is, what has been in several of the cases, all of this was not allowed into court, by the way, but in the criminal case, but there have been at least 8 or 9 federal cases, some of them appellate federal cases, where they've said that Section 230 and the First Amendment apply. And one of the best ones, as you know, was written by 7th Circuit Judge Richard Posner. And Posner was a very perceptive judge. I mean, most jurists don't get this stuff at all. But he was saying, look, there are a lot of things that come under the category of sex work which are perfectly legal. He said that there's erotic massage, there's phone sex, there's dominatrix. He went down fetishes. I mean, he was really and he knew what he was talking about. And so it's like there's no law against that, and then he basically was saying that these ads are illegal. They're protected by the First Amendment. So it's just unfortunate that none of that was allowed to be used in court, because it would have been very helpful to the state of mind of the defense. I think I told you this too, but it was interesting during the sentencing. The judge was sentencing Lacey. She said some very interesting things. At one point, she said, well, one of the things she sentences people on is deterrence. This is like not just deterrent. It could be deterrence in the sense that you don't want other people to commit the same crimes, but deterrence in the sense of the individual, so that they won't go out and commit another crime, right? So you're holding them responsible for their actions, supposedly. So she said there is no deterrence with Mr. Lacey, because Mr. Lacey doesn't think he's done anything wrong. And I was like, that's interesting, because in criminal law, there's this thing called mens rea, which means the guilty mind. And to commit you have to have mens rea to commit a crime, because you can't, if otherwise it's an accident, right? If you didn't know, oh, I did something and it was illegal.
It's the act of furtherance. It's the act of furtherance. Yeah.
Yeah, the mens rea, that would be you're right. That would fall under the mens rea, where you're doing something wrong, right? But in this case, Lacey had every reason to believe he was within the confines of the law. And that's significant, but that wasn't allowed into the case. He wasn't allowed to make that argument. His lawyers weren't. So I don't know. That's one of the hopes on appeal, I suppose.
But there was more stuff that wasn't allowed in this case.
Yes, a lot. They weren't allowed to mention Section 230. They were barely allowed to mention the First Amendment. They really weren't allowed to make a robust First Amendment argument. The court cases were not allowed in. I think I mentioned advice of counsel. They couldn't talk about the fact that all their money had been taken. All of these things were, and then
but
also. Go ahead.
But one of the things they couldn't talk about was they couldn't talk about how they've been cooperating with the FBI.
Right. They were able to talk about that some, but once again, the prosecution used that against them. It's like, well, we answered hundreds of subpoenas within 20. Well, you should have known that something illegal was happening if you had hundreds of subpoenas. You see, that's the twisted logic. They go, and then also another significant thing that was not allowed into the case, as there were two memos, Department of Justice memos in 2012 and 2013. They've since been published by Reason Magazine, where basically the DOJ argues, look, don't prosecute these guys. They're cooperating with us, and there's a First Amendment element to this. And it's like, really? Okay, but these are memos that were kept secret until the prosecution inadvertently gave them to the defense, and where they gave them like this ton of stuff, and in there somewhere were these two memos. And when the defense said, hey, what about, we want to use these, the judge there was a different judge at that time. The judge at that time says, no, you can't use those. That's what they call attorney work product, and that's protected. So you can't. You couldn't bring in this. I don't know. Everything that would have been exculpatory was not allowed into the case. And then also, I should mention too that the FBI destroyed massive amounts of evidence by destroying the website.
Oh yeah, talk about that. When the FBI seized Backpage, of what they did, what they do, what happened to the servers? What happened?
Well, in other cases like this, what they have done is they made a mirror image of the website so that the site is preserved as it was when they seized it. They didn't do that here, and there was never an explanation of why they didn't do it. Okay, I think I know why. Okay, so anyway, the servers were in Tucson. They go down to Tucson. They seize the servers and they take them apart. There was an evidentiary hearing where they went into all this, and the guy who created the website was present, the technical guy, right? And they asked him, well, can you put it back together again? And he said, no. He said, I'd have to have if I'd have to know how they took it apart. I'd have to have a map of how they took it before I could put it back together. And he said, I don't think I could do it because they didn't keep a record of it. So they knew what they were doing. Okay, they knew exactly. So anyway, they have all this data. They say that they reconstituted it, repackaged it, and gave it back to the defense. And the defense would have to use this really expensive software to extract the data. It was so cumbersome they couldn't use it, because if they had made this mirror image, it would have been very easy to do searches, word searches for Backpage. And they absolutely knew what they were doing in that case, because then this didn't allow the defendants to, for instance, they were making reports to NCMEC, the National Center for Exploited and Missing Children, on ads.
Backpage was reporting ads that were posted on their site to this national group that's
right.
That's involved in crafting federal legislation like FOSTA SESTA to shut those sites down.
Once again, it's hindsight's 2020, but at the time, they were receiving considerable pressure, and they wanted to be able to say, hey, look, we're doing everything we can to keep trafficking off the site. Okay. And if there was something that they suspected of being involved in trafficking, they would report it. Like if they saw a picture, they thought it was underage, maybe it might be underage. It's hard to tell, right? Because people are using fake photos. People are using other people's photos. They're blurring.
Photoshop. We're using Photoshop. We're doing
right.
all kinds of filters on our photos all the time. Yeah.
Oh, and this is interesting. Interestingly, this is something that was mentioned in those memos. They talk about like, well, people use fake photos all the time, and it's like they try to appear young and they're not young, and it's like whatever. It's like and the memos also pointed out what Posner pointed out, which was hey, we didn't know, and they said we didn't know this until we started researching it, but there is sex work that's legal. There's pornography, right? There's like all these categories which are perfectly legal, and so the DOJ.
There's online content creating.
Right.
There's adult film performing. There's online or phone sex. That's legal. Sex texting, that's legal.
Right.
Exotic dancing is legal. Yeah, there's a lot of webcamming.
Right. Exactly. There's a huge amount of that's legal, and so. It's weird because we've lived through this time where at one point we had the ability to express ourselves with in these contexts, and now we're not allowed to express ourselves in these contexts. Although I haven't seen, what do you think of Musk? Because it seems to me that Twitter is still allowing some content that the other sites don't allow, right?
Twitter, yes.
Although I don't know how long that's. I mean, look what happened to the guy who with Telegram, the CEO of Telegram.
Well, and Brazil just kicked, turned Twitter off. Yeah, Brazil. Yeah, Lula. We're gonna have to go talk to Lula. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's. Although I don't know. I mean, I think like you tell me what you think, because in some ways, the harder they try, the more they don't succeed, because it's sort of like there's always an electronic way around it, right? There's if enough.
It's not only electronic, Stephen.
Yeah.
When it comes to prostitution, we can just always go back to the street.
Yeah.
And so right now here in America and throughout California, there's all of this complaining. There's all of these news reports about all of this prostitution going on in the streets, all the solicitation that's going on in the streets, all of this hookup that's going on in the streets. And that's one of the things that we said when they were targeting Backpage. Do you want us to all go back to the street? Because we can.
No, it's more dangerous.
And so now there's all this prostitution all over the place, and people are screaming about it. There was just a lawsuit filed in San Francisco by some of the Mission neighbors in the Mission district against the city and county of San Francisco for all the public nuisance that prostitution, sex trafficking, public urination, people carrying and playing loud music, and drinking in public are causing the neighbors.
Yeah, that's interesting. Although,
so, that.
Yeah, that it is. Well, I don't know.
You could have kept us online. You could have kept people housed. You could have kept people online. You could have kept people indoors. But no, you didn't want to do that. The public has to take responsibility for electing people like Kamala Harris and President Trump, because those are the people you elect to represent your will. And they are supposed to be, you think that they're making decisions that's best for the public, and they're not.
No.
They're only making decisions that are best to further their careers. That's the only basis they make those decisions.
You're
sorry,
absolutely
public.
100% correct. Well, as you're familiar with that Craigslist study that showed that when Craigslist had its adult section, it actually lowered the entire homicide rate for all women. Wasn't it like 17? Wasn't it like 17%? I can't remember the exact number, but it was significant. It was significant. I mean, it was like, wow. And so basically, and the guy who did it pointed out the reasons. People were able to operate inside. People were able to vet their clients, et cetera, et cetera. It made things safer. I mean, bringing it inside makes it safer.
Yeah, they don't care about making my job safer. They don't care about the public's safety. They don't care. That's
no, they don't.
When they can keep us at each other's throats in competing against each other, that works for them, right? That totally keeps the focus away from them and what they're doing and holding them accountable, because the system that we have in place to hold them accountable isn't working. It's not. It's too cumbersome. There's no accountability. The police who are doing these prostitution sting operations at the state level, prostitution's criminalized at the state level. They're doing these sting operations. They're having sex with us in the course of these sting operations. They are calling it sex trafficking in their press releases when it's not. So there's all this lying to the public and state-sponsored sexual assault that goes on in these prostitution sting operations. They don't really care. The police are allowed to give all this money from their police associations to candidates like Kamala Harris, to like President Trump, to run for re-election. And, they're not going to hold those police accountable for doing all those criminal acts. And they're not going to hold the police accountable when the police are like, oh, there's so many prostitutes running around the streets. So, well, I can't do anything about it. I guess you'll have to sue the city of San Francisco for public nuisance to get us to do anything about it, because it's not a high priority for us. We're 300 officers low, and we can't enforce all these janky laws that these people, the public keeps rubber stamping and passing.
Yeah.
So you have to decide as the public, what is important here.
Yeah, well, you've seen
you should repeal FOSTA SESTA. You should let everybody go back online from where we came.
Yeah, but I don't see it going in that direction. I see it going in the other. Don't you? I mean, I don't see it reversing itself.
But that's not going to stop us from making that demand, and it's not going to stop us from organizing. Certainly, if Kamala Harris is seated as president, there's going to be more to come. And people are going to have to really be more highly organized in terms of their work and in terms of their, ability to organize politically. And
Right.
those are going to be some really important things. And I think the public is starting to understand now that their political speech or their freedom of speech online has been greatly impinged upon, especially with all the fake news that the politicians are, in good part responsible for manufacturing. That
Right.
the police are manufacturing a bunch of this fake news. And so I think people are starting to, figure all this stuff out. And if she's seated as president and, she doesn't get some things dealt with, by the end of 2025, 26, it's going to be a lot of chaos
Well,
because there is already so much chaos going on.
yeah, I don't know. I think it is interesting how the right wing has adopted free speech as a mantra, right? It's like it's like the left doesn't want it anymore, but the right will take it. It's like, but it's, I don't know. I guess free speech has always been. There's never like a natural constituency for it, right? But at one time, the Democrats were more vocal about free speech, and now it's just something they run away from. So it's
well, my hope, yeah. I mean, we got to wrap up quick here, but I see her doing to the Democratic Party what Trump did to the Republican Party, and that's going to be a good thing for this country.
I'll see to your expertise on that, and I know you guys are in the trenches fighting, and you're not going to stop fighting. So that's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's good for all of us, because even if you're not a sex worker, or you don't, maybe if you don't like the idea of it, it still impacts you, because silencing any group of people, eventually it comes back to you. It's like a boomerang. So,
yeah, your karma's coming for you, America.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's been great talking to you. I love talking to you. I love your quote on Twitter. You should follow Stephen. I'm going to put all the links that we've talked about today in the show notes. Stephen's tagline is, "I'll tell you right out, I'm a man who likes to talk to a man who likes to talk." And I love that.
Or a woman in this case. And thank you very much. I really, I admire you, and I really appreciate the work you guys do. So keep at it.
Well, thank you. Because when I told everybody today that I was going to talk to you, they're like, "Oh, thanks, Stephen, for being on the front lines and following what's going on there and helping everybody through following, what's happening in this case, because everybody should get their eyes on it." Well, have a good day. And I'm sure I'll talk to you soon. Appreciate you.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.